What's up, everyone? We're back again with another episode of Loners here.
We're a day late. You can blame me. It's fine.
Yeah. So Linda went to Disneyland.
Were you really about to say world? Like you don't know where we live?
I forget.
Yeah, I went for my niece's birthday yesterday. I was there for like 15 hours, and I was too exhausted.
Yeah. When she came back, yeah, you seemed really exhausted.
Well, I came back at midnight. There was no way we were gonna film.
And you left so early too.
I know. I left at like 6 a.m.
Yeah. So it's a day late, but
it's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's gonna care.
yeah, I don't think so either. So this is episode number 123. Roll that intro. So we're going to do a video today called Why the U.S. Gave Up on Public Transit. It's by CNBC, but I'll put the original in the description. All right, let's begin.
17 minutes. That's how long Americans had to wait on average to get on public transit in 2022.
Transit in the U.S. is awful, with few exceptions in a few places. It's infrequent, it's not all day, it's unreliable.
Meanwhile, 45% of Americans have no access to public transportation at all.
The real problem in the US is what I would call transit deserts, right? I mean, these are just places where it is just complete and total nightmare to try to get anywhere on transit, whether to work or, to play, to pick up your kids. You just can't depend on it.
The US spent $79 billion on public transit in 2019.
Damn.
Yet most public transit across the nation is finding itself in a fiscal crisis. In 2021, the US was $176 billion behind in updating the poor conditions of public transit.
These numbers are ridiculous.
It's wild that we spend so much money and we don't see where it's going.
Well, I wonder if they might not actually spend this exact amount on public transit, but they just say they do, and then they're able to put some of it somewhere else.
Okay, but
because our public transit sucks, and if they've been spending almost hundreds of billions on it, that's
we live in a city too.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We're
Wealth
also
is
West
expected
Coast,
to grow to $250 billion by the year 2029.
Damn.
Ultimately, it's the riders who are paying for the deficit.
The pandemic money is going to run out, and so there will be, I think there will be fare increases, but even more, I think because of the politics of it, there will be service reduction, and many places have predicted that.
So just how did public transit in the US get so awful? And can it be improved? The US government has long favored cars over public transportation.
When we talk about money for transit, we talk about funding. But when we talk about the same public money for roads, we often hear the word investment.
We're spending far more, hundreds of billions more, on road improvement and infrastructure than we are on transit.
For example, US railways combining commuter, heavy, and light rail grew by 945 miles between 2010 and 2020. During the same period, highways were expanded by over 100,000 miles.
In transportation, we very often have no choices. If we're talking about local or area transportation, it's very often only driving.
History plays a big role in this discrepancy. There was a time when the US boasted a public transit system that was the envy of the world.
Prior to 1920s, we had a very good streetcar system in our cities.
These were trams that were running typically in the middle of the street. You would board them at your convenience. They were often so frequent that you didn't have to plan ahead.
During its peak in the 1920s, Americans living in cities averaged more than 250 streetcar trips per year. But the electric streetcar business was far from profitable. Inflation drove up the operating costs, but businesses were unable to raise fares accordingly, and services quickly began to deteriorate as a result.
When the streetcar companies, which were private, went to the government and so forth and said, please help us, city governments, state governments, and of course the federal government wasn't involved at all in this period, basically turned a blind eye.
By the end of World War I, a third of transit companies were already in bankruptcy, and America had found its newest obsession: cars.
people who wanted
I
to...
just don't see why they wouldn't see that as like
Because it wasn't as profitable. That's why. I think they realized like, oh, this isn't going to be as profitable if we put a lot
people
of money.
need to move. Like people need to travel.
Yeah, so then they make them get a car.
I understand, but was that the intention from the beginning, or was it just like a way of adapting to the lack of attention
I don't
put
know.
into public
Because
transportation?
I feel like during that time is when they could start to actually build the infrastructure for transit way more.
But you're spending so much on roads, like you were saying earlier, instead of just
Transit.
making it easier for people to.
Yeah. I'm guessing that it was a plan. They had a plan to do it with cars to make money.
sell more cars, reframed the car as an all-purpose transport necessity instead of a special purpose mobility tool. And when they turned it into that, they really convinced a lot of people that you need this to go everywhere and that you're not living in a modern, progressive city until it's a city that lets you drive everywhere.
And with the influx of money and aid from policies, cities began to quickly transform around cars.
They forced private transit companies whenever possible to strip out the streetcar lines. They created all these one-way streets to speed up automobiles. They built parkways. They built highways.
And when people said, wait a minute, is this really the right way to do it? The answer was, oh, it's just supply and demand. It's a free market. Drivers are voting with their gas pedals, and we need to build the roads and streets for the people who are paying for them.
There is a kind of a time lag between public investment in highway infrastructure versus transit infrastructure in our nation. There was at least 40 to 50 years of lag, and the federal government did not get into public transportation funding programs until late 1960s.
Today, that disparity is more evident through partisan differences. The ratio in which funding is distributed between highways and public transit became the main point of contention over the 2021 infrastructure bill. Democrats wanted just 20% of the budget to go towards mass transit, while Republicans pushed for less. Democrats eventually compromised to pass the bill through the Senate.
We have identified the automobile with personal individual liberty. We also associate driving particularly with suburban and rural America, while public transit we associate with urban America. Those correlations then bleed into political correlations of similar kinds, where fostering more driving tends to be something that's favored in more conservative, more Republican, more rural areas.
A study from 2021 revealed that 77% of liberal respondents believe that transport policy should shift more trips towards public transit, walking, and bicycling, while 53% of conservatives believe that transport policy should make it easier for most people to drive. The discrepancy was even higher with very liberal or conservative respondents.
It's very hard politically to get that kind of momentum. Cities are a little bit easier, but states, very hard to get that suburban voter who is very powerful in almost every state legislature. Very hard to get federal officials behind this because, again, the payoff politically, because it's a relatively small number of users, very small, it can be 1, 2, 3% in most cities. That's not the loud voices. The loud voices are going to be the drivers.
Funding is one of the main reasons behind the poor state of public transit in the U.S.
Right now, the federal money that goes to transit services is largely limited to the capital costs. That means, building the infrastructure or buying the vehicles. But the operating costs are where the transit services are really pinched.
Public transit relies heavily on subsidies because it's still far from a profitable business. Take the MTA, the nation's largest public transit, for example. In 2022, less than a quarter of the MTA's revenue came from rider fares. By comparison, revenue from dedicated taxes and subsidies from local governments made up 40% of its total revenue.
The cost of living, the cost of operations, the cost of construction, all of that over the last, 40, 50 years has far exceeded what is collected in fares.
Current subsidies simply aren't enough to cover the costs. The MTA's finances were hit hard by the pandemic, resulting in temporary aid from the federal government. Yet it still reported a budget deficit of $1.9 billion in 2022.
There's something weird going on with this type of thing. I feel like they're not completely honest with like the money going to these things.
Maybe not. I just feel like if less people needed a car, then that money that they would be spending on it can go back into the economy in other ways.
Yeah.
And to me, like, that would make more sense. Like, that would be more beneficial.
Putting the money back in the economy.
Yeah, like, people are going to spend the money, period. Whether it's on a car payment, gas, or it's on businesses. Like, I don't know.
No, yeah, that's true.
I don't know. It just seems selfish. It's just like,
weird.
Or why does everything have to be a business? Like, can we just
have something?
Can we just have something
that makes it easier? Yeah.
Yeah.
This problem extends beyond New York City. Philadelphia's SEPTA predicts it will see a deficit of almost $269 million by 2027. Chicago's RTA predicts a budget gap of $730 million by 2026. While LA Metro's budget gap expects to reach $1 billion by the end of 2026. These financial deficits lead directly to deteriorating services.
If a transit system doesn't have enough money, we can limit the hours of service, we can limit the frequency of service, we can limit the extent of the network. But all of those things also deter ridership and encourage people to depend on their car.
In a 2022 survey on incentives around public transit, Americans chose accurate and reliable arrival times as the second biggest reason that would encourage them to use public transit more often, right behind lower fares.
Public transportation is so expensive to run in the United States is because of the lack of usage. Mass transit needs mass to be successful.
Ridership has continuously declined since 2015, and after seeing a steep drop during the pandemic, ridership has failed to recover to its previous levels.
It's a vicious cycle, right? If we have less users, less riders, it's difficult to justify significant public investment.
I'm speaking on the West Coast. They also make taking public transportation like an undesirable experience. Like, it's not clean. It doesn't feel like...
I'm sure it's like that in New York too.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not going to speak for all of US if I don't live over there.
I know.
I'm sure it's even worse over there because more people do take public transportation. So it's like, if you don't put the energy into making it something people would want to do,
and it also just
then you're not gonna have enough people spending money doing it.
Yeah, I think it also goes back to like how it was set up in the beginning, because if it was made already in the beginning for that, obviously we'd have millions of people using public transit. But then I don't know what the solution is.
I understand not everywhere needs public transportation in America.
It's more cities.
Yeah, I do think a lot of cities, or even just like larger suburban areas, like, it just makes sense.
I remember when I first moved out here, and to get from Santa Monica to Hollywood all the time, I had to take like 3 buses.
It's crazy.
And then I would have to like sit and wait like 20 minutes for one of the buses, and then go to the next stop. Yeah, it's a whole process. And I noticed like when we were in Spain, especially, like that shit was nice.
Yeah. In Australia too, like it just
the
seems
Australian
clean.
one was nice in Sydney. You literally go around the whole.
You know, it was really
all
nice.
of Sydney on one shot.
I know.
In that system, and therefore it's become more difficult to provide quality service. And because you have a lack of quality of service, you will continue to have lack of users and riders.
If the riders are either insufficient in number or do not provide a fare, right, that covers those costs, you have to make up that money in public subsidies. And in the United States, the structure of funding for public transit is insufficient to basically really make up for that missing enormous chunk of money to fund operations and capital.
But a thriving public transit system is beneficial for all Americans. The American Public Transportation Association estimates that 87% of trips on transit directly benefit the local economy, with nearly $42 billion in transit spending going directly to the private sector. A dollar invested in public transit is believed to generate $5 in economic returns.
I mean, look what happened with Amazon. Where did Amazon locate its new, second headquarters, right? Right where one of the better, mass transit systems operate. Transit is really great for an employer because it gives them more options, right, in terms of labor.
We can connect people to employment opportunities, including people who can't necessarily afford an automobile, which is a very expensive thing both to buy and to operate and maintain.
When you don't have transportation, everything else become a domino effect. You may end up with not able to connect with your family and friends, not able to go to doctor appointments, and not able to have a good income to sustain your house.
And in the end, it can even benefit the drivers themselves.
The more we attract people into rail or buses or other forms of public transit, the fewer people are driving on the roads, and that makes driving better for people who want to drive.
Ultimately, the future of public transit relies on whether it can receive the proper investment needed to improve services.
To break the vicious cycle, we need a significant investment from the federal government. I mean, I don't think just with local innovations we can solve this problem of this magnitude.
We'd have to spend a lot of money up front.
I feel like at this point, because we're so
used to driving,
and there's already a stigma about public transportation, at least out here.
Yeah.
I feel like it would have at this point take an incentive to get people to do that.
Yeah.
And then how far is it going to take for them to?
Because they're going to lose more money.
Yeah, even more. They're already subsidizing a lot of
In order to get systems that cost a lot less to operate, because you'd have more robust ridership.
Cities can also be reimagined and redesigned to better serve public transit.
The kind of density levels that most American suburbs have, very difficult to serve effectively by transit, even buses. You have to create more dense neighborhoods, and particularly, this is really important, you have to change the zoning and the density around transit.
I conceptualize public transportation as a public space. If you think about in a city, how much space we have, really.
I mean, they're not going to remake the infrastructure. Like, that would be way too much of a task.
I don't think it'd be like starting from scratch. I just think they need to focus on what is going to improve it.
You know what they could do? Underground. They could do more underground stuff.
I mean, we do have underground metros.
But I'm saying
it's not the majority, but
they could make like much larger networks to get places underground.
Again, funding. Like, who's going to pay for that? I think that's
we
the biggest.
Give billions of dollars to
right that go other places for no reason. But it's not a focus, like you were saying. It's not profitable right now.
Yeah, I know.
And our country's not one to put people over profit.
Yeah.
But
it's true.
Yeah, I think this is something that it would have to be like a state by state thing for them to take the initiative. It's not going to be federal at all.
Obviously, do it in the bigger cities.
They're trying
where people
to
would
do
use
that one
it.
train in from like here to San Francisco. Remember a few years ago?
Oh yeah.
And they were really like talking it up, and then all of a sudden they're like, "We don't have the budget," and I'm like,
and also from here to Vegas.
I heard about that. I only heard about that like once.
Yeah. That'd be wild.
Like, little sections of the country need to
be able to go to each
brainstorm
other.
and come up with something. Like, shit.
I conceptualize public transportation as a public space. If you think about in a city, how much space we have really help people with different background come together. There is a diminishing number of places that we have in our city. If we have a good public transportation system, it's like the core spaces for people with different background, different class, different gender, race, ethnicity to interact and to encounter. And I think that's very important for the future of our society.
I agree with her, but again, like out here, we have that perception of like you're like lower class. You take the fucking public transportation.
Yeah, like I'm sure on the East Coast it's not like that.
You're not catching a CEO on the metro, at least out
here.
Well,
here, that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying like East Coast, you probably have like businessmen and finance who get paid a lot that will take
I feel like they've made it there in the culture where it's almost a burden to use your car.
It does seem like it. It seems like it's all taxis on the street and then like some cars.
Yeah, like I'm surprised taxis are still being used over there
I think you got a lot of old school people there
with
that
Uber.
that use taxis, but I don't know. I'm sure it's a big thing too of them like fighting it. Because I think there's a union for taxi drivers.
Oh, nice.
I
That
think.
makes sense. I don't know.
But I mean, yeah, that was an interesting video. We hope you liked our reaction, and if you did, like and subscribe. And I forgot to say in the beginning, make sure to jump over to our vlog channel. Okay, guys, like and subscribe. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Peace.